大家好，欢迎来到科林语课堂。今天我们学习的术语可以帮大家读懂新冠疫情新闻报道中的关键数据，以及含各种数据的疫情描述。我是你们的主讲老师丽丽老师。
Hello and welcome to Corley English. Today we will go over some terminology that will help you understand some of the statistics you'll see on the news regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm your second instructor, George Corley. Cases and prevalence. Severe case. A severe case is a case that is especially dangerous to the health of the patient. This will include cases where a patient is put on a ventilator, for instance. Severe cases of COVID-19 may require patients to be put on a ventilator to assist breathing. For every death due to COVID-19, there are many more people with severe cases that may have lifelong complications. There is a way to track the number of patients who were hospitalized due to COVID-19 and have since been discharged, effectively tracking how many people have recovered from the most severe cases. Hospitalizations. A hospitalization is a case where a patient has to stay at a hospital for care. In other words, the patient is hospitalized. Florida shattered its record for weekly hospitalizations, making it one of the biggest coronavirus hotspots in the nation. Rising hospitalizations are a growing concern for those dealing with the pandemic. Recovery rate. People have different technical definitions of recovery rate, but in the context of the pandemic, it generally refers to the proportion of people diagnosed with COVID-19 who have successfully survived it and are free of the virus. The recovery rate has been a point of friction for some public officials, as different states use distinct formulas to calculate the rate. Some politicians have been pointing to recovery rates as a bright spot in the pandemic. Prevalence. Prevalence describes the proportion of existing cases at a particular time or during a particular period in a specified population. For example, if we want to know the prevalence of COVID-19 during March 2020 in a small community of 40 people, we need to compare the number of people found to have the disease with the total population of the community. It is usually expressed as a fraction, percentage, or the number of cases per 10,000 or 100,000 people. With a sustained 5-week downward trend in positive COVID-19 tests in Routt County, the county remains in a low category in terms of disease prevalence, Routt County Chief Medical Officer Dr. Brian Harrington told the Routt County Board of Commissioners, serving as the Board of Health last week. A recent review of research suggests that the proportion of all patients hospitalized with COVID-19 who have asthma is similar to the prevalence of asthma in the wider population. Incidence. Incidence is the number of new cases that develop during a given period in a specified population. For instance, if we want to know the incidence of new COVID-19 cases during April 2020 in the previously mentioned community of 40 people, we need to compare the number of new cases that developed during that month with the total number of people in the community. A lot of people tend to confuse prevalence and incidence. As we can see, they are actually different. Prevalence looks at all existing cases.
也就是说，流行率这一数据是用来描述当前的总病例在特定的总人数中所占的比例。当然，这里的总病例既包括旧病例，也包括新病例。所以，当我们要计算该社区2020年4月份新冠肺炎的流行率，我们就需要把新旧病例的总和放在分子的位置，把社区的总人数放在分母的位置。
That's right. Prevalence usually answers questions like how many people have the disease at this moment, or in this case, how many people in the community had COVID-19 during April of 2020.
与流行率不同，发病率主要侧重于新病例。具体到这个例子呢，也就是回答在2020年4月份该社区一共有多少新的感染者。
So we can easily see that prevalence indicates how widespread the disease is, while incidence conveys information about the risk of contracting the disease. The incidence of COVID-19 cases among American Indians and Alaska Natives was 3.5 times that among white people, according to a new report from the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. One noteworthy analysis from Italy observed that higher concentrations of fine particulate matter corresponded with higher COVID-19 incidence and mortality across 110 geographic areas in the region. Morbidity. Morbidity can be used either at the individual level or across a population. When used at the individual level, it refers to the unhealthy state of that person. When it is used across a population, it is also known as morbidity rate, examining the proportion of people who have complications from a disease in a specific population during a given period of time. For COVID-19, there are some different technical definitions of morbidity that make tracking and comparing it difficult. People show a wide range of symptoms, and there's evidence that some people can have lasting effects long after the disease ends, so it's difficult to decide what counts. The failure to measure COVID-19 morbidity makes it far harder to evaluate the true risk from the pandemic. High morbidity is a serious concern for hospitals working to expand their capacity. Epicenter. This term originally comes from terminology describing earthquakes, where it refers to the point on the surface directly above the focus of the quake. But it has expanded just to refer to the central point of some kind of destructive event. In the context of the COVID-19 crisis, it refers to the place where the epidemic is most severe. Currently, as we know, that is the United States. If you've been following the news over time in the US, you'll see that different states have been described as the epicenter of the COVID-19 epidemic, including New York, Washington, California, and Florida, as the virus has gotten under control in some regions and exploded with new outbreaks in others. As Florida's coronavirus cases and deaths surged to record levels in July, some national media reports labeled the state an epicenter for the disease. Australia's second most populous state has been the epicenter of a second wave of the novel coronavirus, now accounting for about 75% of the country's 26,282 cases and 90% of its 753 deaths. India is emerging as a global epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, with the virus spreading rapidly throughout the country, including to rural areas where public health facilities are largely non-existent. Death. Death toll. The death toll is just a reporting of the total number of deaths from some event or cause, whether it's a war, a pandemic, or a natural disaster. What it shows is that some places have seen staggering death tolls, while a few states have experienced fewer deaths but enough to clearly differentiate this year from a typical one. As the death toll keeps rising, we need to keep up measures to control the virus. Case-fatality rate. We see in this word a compound of case and fatality.
柯老师刚才提到的 compound 指的是复合词，是由两个或两个以上的词汇语素，或者是由两个独立的词连接起来而生成的合成词。构成 case-fatality 这个复合名词的是两个独立名词 case 和 fatality。case 指的是病例 ，fatality 是 fatal 这个形容词的名词形式，具体是在该形容词的后面加上 ity 这个典型的名词派生后缀而生成的。fatal 的同义词为 deadly 这个单词大家应该很熟悉，我们在上节课的例句中有学到，翻译成中文也就是致命的。那么源自 fatal 的派生名词fatality 的意思也就一目了然了，也就是死亡。
Yep, that's right. Fatality is just another word for death. So the term case-fatality rate means the proportion of known cases that show up as deaths.
Case-fatality rate 病死率有时也被称为 case-fatality risk or case-fatality ratio， 指的是在一定的时期内因患某种疾病而死亡的人数占同时期患者总数的比例，通常会以百分比的形式出现。病死率表示的是确诊病例的死亡概率，可以反映出某种疾病的严重程度。
The county's case-fatality rate from COVID-19 has dropped from 4% in May to 2% now, according to county data. The case-fatality rate is decreasing as doctors find better ways to treat patients. As COVID-19 cases continue to increase in Missouri, the state's case-fatality rate has decreased. Mortality rate. The mortality rate is the number of deaths compared to the entire population. Some people may confuse case-fatality rate and mortality rate, including native speakers. You might see some people say mortality rate when they really mean case-fatality rate.
没错，这里我想特别的强调一下，死亡率和我们刚才学的病死率是完全不同的两个概念。死亡率是某时期内死亡人数占同时期总人数的比例，而病死率是死亡人数占病例总数的比例。我们可以看出，两者最根本的区别在于分母。死亡率的分母是可能发生死亡事件的总人数，而病死率的分母是患者的总人数。
California's mortality rate is rising as the state's death toll from COVID-19 surpassed 10,000 on Thursday. COVID-19 has already shown a potential for very high mortality rates. Keeping infections down will help us keep the mortality rate in check. Testing. Test, positive, negative. All of these words have many uses, but we will focus on the most relevant for our purpose here. A test is some process that uses a sample from the body to detect a pathogen. A positive test indicates the pathogen is present, while a negative test indicates that it is absent. Have you been tested for COVID-19? Ten people in Los Angeles tested positive for COVID-19 last week. But after just a few days of quarantine and another battery of tests, all 10 then tested negative. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Yuri Trutnev has tested positive for COVID-19. False positive, false negative. A false positive is an error in which a test falsely shows the presence of a condition when it is not present.
False positive 指的是假阳性，也就是阴性的非患者被误诊为阳性，所以假阳性也被称为误诊。
A false negative is the opposite error, in which the test result fails to show the presence of a condition when it's actually present.
False negative 指的是假阴性，也就是实为阳性的患者被错误地诊断为阴性，所以假阴性也被称为漏诊。在当前新冠疫情这个背景下，假阴性指的是在对阳性的感染者做检查时，没有发现他们体内的病原体，使结果错误地显示为阴性。误诊会给接受检测的非患者个人带来不必要的心理压力，而对于像新冠这样的传染病而言，漏诊所带来的社会影响会严重得多，因为你很可能会在没有意识到自己被感染的情况下，把病毒传播给他人。
We need to ensure low false positive and false negative rates to get an accurate picture of the pandemic. As with all disease tests, a false positive result on a COVID-19 test can cause undue stress on individuals as they try to navigate their diagnosis, take days off work, and isolate from family. The sheer scale of the pandemic and the volume of testing means that there are far more false negatives occurring than we think. Diagnostic test. Antibody test. A diagnostic test is performed to see if you currently have a disease. By collecting a fluid sample, this type of test can detect whether someone is infected by detecting genetic material of the virus or certain proteins in the virus. Diagnostic tests are what most people are getting right now. An antibody test is a type of test that detects the antibodies that the body creates to fight the coronavirus. These tests are generally administered after the fact to find out if a patient ever had COVID-19 in the past. There are two types of common diagnostic tests. One looks for the coronavirus's genetic material, while the antigen test searches for proteins. Promega said Tuesday it has applied to the Food and Drug Administration for emergency use authorization for its antibody test. More antibody testing will give us a clearer idea of how the disease was spreading before we had enough diagnostic tests. Would you take an antibody test to see if you've had the coronavirus? Suspected case. A suspected case refers to a patient who we have reason to believe could have the disease because they show symptoms or have been in contact with someone who we know has the disease, but who hasn't been tested yet. There may be different definitions here depending on what jurisdictions choose to report as a suspected case. Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, said a suspected case is someone who fits the criteria of travel exposure or exposure to a confirmed case and has symptoms consistent with COVID-19 before they are tested. Early in the pandemic, China reported many suspected cases of COVID-19 because of a lack of testing. We currently don't report suspected cases, which may mean we are underreporting the degree of the pandemic. Confirmed case. In the context of COVID-19, a confirmed case is one where there's a valid positive test from the patient. Most reports only include confirmed cases right now. The death toll from confirmed cases of the coronavirus in Massachusetts rose by 5 to 8,519, state officials reported Monday, and the number of confirmed cases climbed by 214, bringing the total to 112,673. As of Sunday, September 27th, there have been 8,584 confirmed cases among residents in long-term care facilities in Michigan. Active case. An active case is one where the patient currently has the disease, whether they have symptoms or not.
这里我想对 confirmed case 和 active case 简单的做一下区分，两者都是检测结果呈阳性的病例，但 confirmed case 确诊病例仅仅强调结果显示为阳性这一事实，除了当前的患者外，还可能是检测结果曾显示为阳性，但现已转阴的康复者。
Yep. In other words, a confirmed case is anyone who's had the experience of getting a positive result.
而 active case 活跃病例强调的是当前的状态，指的是当前结果显示为阳性的患者，无论该患者是否有明显的症状。
That is to say, an active case is anyone who currently has a positive result. Wisconsin reports no new COVID-19 deaths. Active cases decrease. The number of active cases of COVID-19 in Vermont is now the lowest it's been in months. Test positivity rate. The test positivity rate is simply the proportion of tests that come up positive. This is an important statistic because too high of a test positivity rate in many cases means that we are not testing enough people and potentially missing cases. Back in May, the World Health Organization advised governments that the positivity rate in a given population should remain at 5% or lower for at least 14 days before reopening. We need to do more testing to bring the test positivity rate down. New York City Mayor proposes closing schools and businesses in 9 areas with high COVID-19 test positivity rates. Mathematical curves. Exponential growth. Exponential growth is a type of mathematical curve which shows a rapid accelerating increase caused by a number multiplying itself at regular intervals.
这个概念大家应该比较熟悉，指的是一个变量从一个时期以固定的比率快速增长。
An unchecked epidemic will usually follow an exponential curve, with a few cases ballooning into thousands or millions very rapidly. When we take action to reduce the rate by which the virus multiplies, we put the brakes on exponential growth. All local Michigan State University students have been asked to self-quarantine immediately for the next 2 weeks to contain the exponential growth of COVID-19 cases. Flatten the curve. Early in the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about how the goal of quarantines and lockdowns was to flatten the curve. This phrase refers to taking measures to contain the spread of infection so as to avoid overwhelming the healthcare system all at once. The curve needed to be flattened, meaning the graphs would show a shallow curve representing cases spread out across time, rather than a large spike in cases early on that far exceeds the space available in hospitals.
疫情期间，我们在新闻中会经常碰到 flatten the curve 这个表达。curve 这个词的中文释义为曲线。flatten 这个词是及物动词，是由形容词 flat 派生而来的。 具体的需要先双写词尾的辅音字母 t， 然后添加后缀 en。形容词 flat 的意思为扁平的、平坦的，加后缀生成的动词 flatten 的意思为使变平、压平、拉平。所以 flatten the curve 这个短语就可以翻译成压平曲线、拉平曲线。放在新冠疫情这个语境下，可以用来描述有效的防护措施对疫情蔓延的遏制作用。在没有采取有效的控制手段时，感染病例会迅速上升，呈现出的曲线会很陡峭，疫情的传播速度会非常快。在采取了有效的措施之后，曲线图上的峰值会降低，线条被拉平，疫情的传播速度也会被延缓。
San Francisco flattened the curve early. Now, coronavirus cases are surging. Latin America, unable to flatten its curve, struggles to cope with pandemic. Failure to flatten the coronavirus curve in the United States could lead to even more deaths than previously believed, a new study claims. Threshold. A threshold is a level at which some action or reaction is triggered. That is to say, when a measurement reaches a threshold, we expect something to happen.
Threshold 翻译成中文也就是阈值，也称为临界值。这个术语可以用于多个领域，指的是可以引发某个效应的最低或最高值。
Currently, cities and states have set varying thresholds for opening or closing schools, activating lockdowns, allowing businesses to open, or other actions related to the tension between containing the virus and keeping the economy running.
流行病学上可以用来指疫情的扩展情况达到了可以采取某种措施的程度。
Kansas dropped below the threshold to be on the city's quarantine list, but will need another week of declining numbers to be officially removed, health officials said. According to the Johns Hopkins University's calculations, Maryland's statewide coronavirus positivity rate rose to 5.39% as of Sunday, the second straight day it has surpassed the 5% threshold recommended by the World Health Organization before governments reopen. With class back in session this week at the University of Georgia amid the coronavirus pandemic, the University System of Georgia says it still has not established an infection threshold that would force all classes online.
好嘞，最近新冠疫情新闻中与数据相关的关键词汇基本上就是这些了。希望我们的讲解可以帮您读懂疫情数据。下集新闻词汇课的学习内容会围绕疫情给经济所带来的冲击。我们会在本视频结尾的屏幕右上方展示下节课会学到的部分词汇，感兴趣的朋友们可以留意一下。今天的课程就先到这儿，咱们下节课见吧。
See you next lesson. Bye. Support us on Patreon for access to exclusive learning materials. You can follow along with a PDF of our lesson PowerPoint, download high-quality audio files to listen to our lessons on the go, or get access to bilingual transcripts of each lesson. Just go to patreon.com/Corley English, select your monthly pledge amount, and instantly gain access. Your contribution will help us to keep creating more quality English learning content for you to enjoy. Thank you!